Well, hey, welcome to week 8 of my update of going through school to get my master's degree. We covered a whole lot of stuff this week. Oh man, was it packed. For only being 2 classes, it was really a packed week. So a lot of things to learn and to go through. So my my Christianity class is done. That ended last week, basically. Um, sorry, my camera moved on me. The Let's start with the Chinese class. That one I spent a lot of time on yesterday learning. Um, it was quite the class. I can tell you that. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Absolutely loved going through that class. It really is fun. I'm learning so much. So in this time we talked about the Han and Tang dynasties. These are the dynasties after the Qin dynasty. Remember, Qin was the one that had the 100 flowers, all the wars going on, and then the Qin came in and just took over everybody, unified, standardized China, brought them all together. Well, then they get weak. Eventually, the Han dynasty kind of goes weak and then has some issues, and then we get into the Wei dynasty and the Northern Wei, and they kind of split and divide. During this time frame, it's interesting because the Chinese, after the standardization, okay, they tried to push Confucianism out and Taoism out for the most part, and focus on a principle called legalism, which is kind of a variation of today's communism. Um, it works really well during hard, like war times, but it doesn't work so well in prosperous times. And that's one of the challenges they would have is, hey, legalism sucks. Well, now that we're prosperous, let's get rid of it and switch to something else. And so the Qin dynasty tried to get rid of Confucianism and Taoism completely, but people got sick of living legalism and said, we need to get rid of legalism. Let's go back to Confucianism. So they switched. They started back into Confucianism in the subsequent dynasties. But what's interesting is with the building of the Great Wall in the Qin dynasty, finishing that off, there was a big separation early on in Chinese history, that a group of people who was seen as the rednecks of Chinese, if you will, the kind of the outcasts, they're the ruffians, they're the ones that are kind of rough around the edges, not quite as refined as everybody else. They're seen as the barbarians, and they were pushed to the north. So up into what we'd call Mongolia and those areas today. That's the Huns. That's the barbarians is what they were called. Um, so there's, they're like, oh, you're not as Chinese as us, so we want to kick you guys out. We want to kind of preserve our true nature of the Chinese. And during the time of the Han and Tang dynasties, that changed. The barbarians started coming into China. And I believe that was during the Northern Wei period that we saw more of that coming in. I'm trying to do this off the top of my head, trying to remember all my dates and how it all worked out, but I believe it's around the Northern Wei was a heavy influence from barbarians. So they came in and intermingled with the Chinese in the Northern Wei kingdom. So there, most of the kingdom was down below. Most of China was farther south. The Northern Wei was the northern part of the kingdom. So in a way, we saw a division happen in China. So this is like 220-ish AD time frame that China kind of split to a north and the south, where the north was more barbaric, not quite as refined, not quite as traditional Chinese. They had a mixing of beliefs and ideas. In fact, the barbarians had adopted Buddhism because that's the Silk Road follows a northern route at the north end of China. And so they were involved with interacting with people along the Silk Road all the time. And so they got to see a diversity of beliefs and ideas and things. And they picked up Buddhism mainly because it wasn't Chinese. It came from India. But then when the barbarians started mixing in with the Chinese, Buddhism came with them. And then that kind of merged and then shifted. Buddhism is interesting because when you go to different countries, Buddhism has a little different flavor to it. And so in China, it added a little bit of Confucianism and Taoism into it as well. We'll talk about more of those for the next class. But they kind of mingled in, and so there was this division. So the pure Chinese were more the southern part. The Buddhist Chinese kind of intermingled group was the northern part for a while, and then they'll eventually consolidate back together, and be a unified nation once again, and then go away. It's interesting. We heard the story of a female emperor. I think it was the only female emperor in China, Empress Wu. She was. It was interesting because so her husband, I'm trying to remember, Li Shi, I think was his name. He convinced his dad to come together, and they're going to take over these other territories to build a bigger kingdom. They built the Tang Kingdom, basically, if I remember correctly. Yeah, I think they did the Tang Kingdom. It wasn't after them. I think they did that one. But anyways, as they did this, they conquered a land. So his dad kind of became emperor because he was the older of the two. But what Li Shi did was basically killed his dad, or imprisoned his dad, and killed his older brother, and exiled his other brother, so that he basically was the only heir. And then he became emperor. And then his wife, basically, or not his wife, he had a concubine. The emperor eventually dies. He had no heir apparent. He had no sons to give for the kingdom to go to, and so, but he had a concubine that they found out later she was pregnant, and then she had a baby, and I don't know if they found out later if it was before, but anyways, she was pregnant. She has a baby that was a son, so her son becomes king, basically. Gao Zhu, I think was his name, and he becomes the king at a very early age. So his mother rules the country for a while, and then some of the relationship stuff in here, it gets kind of strange. So his mom kind of rules for a while, and then he becomes ruler, and then his mom, of course, was the concubine. She comes up, so she rules, and then her son unfortunately has a stroke and dies. So then she basically is the only ruler left. So she becomes the ruler of the empire, the empress. She actually takes the role of the name of emperor. Zhu Shangdi? No, Shan Cheng Di, I think is what it is. Shan Cheng Di, I think is the name that the first emperor gave himself. That Shuangzi gave himself at the beginning, and that's the name of emperor. So she became the emperor of China, basically. And Buddhism was big at the time. So Buddhism was being adopted, huge deal. One of the things that they started to do is to carve large Buddha statues into the rock. So they built these niches or grottos, basically, into the rock along the river. So some of the rivers have these on there. You can go see them today. They've excavated them and found them. There's a lot of them. But she put her face in there. There's a story in a legend that there's a goddess that she would eventually come back into human form, and the people would prosper underneath her. So she kind of associated herself with the goddess. So the Tang period, they use a lot of Buddhism art to further political views and things. It's really interesting. So, we think of like ancient stories and ideas as so different foreign from us, but they're really not conceptually. We still see a lot of this happen even in politics today, where politicians want it to seem like they have a mandate from heaven. They are divine. They are sent by God to do things for us. When in reality, they're just a human politician trying to get elected. It's just interesting how that works out, but it's crazy time. The Chinese history is absolutely fascinating to understand in what's going on with it. Now, Buddhism is a big part of that. Confucianism comes in, and they kind of intermingle. Some of the beliefs and ideas kind of go back and forth, but there's a lot of influence on each other. And Confucianism and Buddhism are very dynamic philosophies. So again, you get different flavors sometimes that happen with them because they can blend and learn and adjust. They're not super ritualistically rigid like Christianity tries to be, even though it ends up not, but it tries to be. But it's just fascinating. So that was my Chinese class, learning all that stuff and a whole lot more. There's a lot going on. It's pretty wild. Um, in my intro to religious studies class, we have had some intense readings to do. We have been learning about Buddhism, about Hinduism, about Confucianism, about Taoism, Judaism. I'm going to be studying that this weekend and next week, Christianity and Islam. So those are the Islam, Christianity, and Judaism are seen as the Abrahamic religions. And then the other ones were the Eastern religions or non Abrahamic ones. I spent this week on the non Abrahamic ones to understand them better. And so let's talk about those a little bit. They're really fascinating philosophies. So, Buddhism, let's start with Buddhism. Buddhism originates from India. It comes from a gentleman that he was born into a well-to-do family, and then later his dad dies. His mom becomes poor because the society is built on a patriarchal system. So when a woman becomes a widow, basically that's kind of a loophole in society, and they don't help you as much. So he ends up becoming poor. He gets married at some point, has a kid, gets divorced, has ups and downs in his life, basically. And he decides, life sucks. Life is full of suffering and pain. And we need to find a way to deal with this. This is not good. This doesn't feel like it should be what life is all about, is pain. So he realizes that there's got to be more to life than just all this suffering. And as he thinks about it and he ponders it, he does a lot of wandering in his older age as well, just being homeless, wandering around and meditating a lot, learning from others. He starts to realize that there's more, that there is a state of bliss called nirvana. It's a state of just pure being that is total peace, no problems, no issues, and that's a state we want to attain to. Now, Buddhism comes from Hinduism. It branches off from Hinduism. So this gentleman who's the original Buddha. Don't ask me the Indian names for him. I don't know if I could pronounce them off the top of my head. But anyways, the guy Gautama, I think was his last name. His real last name. He is the main Buddha. He was Hindu, and then he just realizes, I don't think Hindu quite has it yet. I mean, Hinduism is good. Hinduism is about prayer, meditation, seeking this state of existence. So we're gonna, in fact, we're gonna talk about Hinduism in just a second. That'll give you some more background here. But he decides, we should work out our own salvation ourselves. We don't need gods per se. We can work it out ourselves. So by seeking to get rid of our connections to things. The more things we're connected to, the more pain and suffering we'll have. The more we're connected to the worldliness that's out there, the more pain and suffering we'll have. And so we want to get rid of all that. So that's why in Buddhism, you kind of sell everything. You live a very humble life because attachments cause you to suffer. We don't want that. We want to eliminate suffering. So we eliminate the attachments. That eliminates a lot of suffering. Then you want to spend a lot of time introspective. How can I learn and understand myself at deeper levels inside? How can I connect to the universal energy that exists out there? And how can I be of service and help for other people? Kindness and service is important. But mainly it's about getting yourself through these works to gain your own salvation, basically. And that's Buddhism. And a lot of people like Buddhism because, who doesn't want to get rid of suffering and pain? That's, the older you get, the more of that you're going to experience. And so you just realize, man, life kind of has its hard times. That's what Buddhism is about, is how can we overcome this? Now, because Buddhism is a branch of Hinduism, there's some similar ideas. So let's talk about Hinduism for a second here. Hinduism believes that we are in our life, that the goal of our life is to find this inner peace that Buddhists call nirvana, this inner peace that allows us to break free of the negative cycles of this life. So they believe in this concept called karma. That's where karma comes from Hinduism. Karma says that when you die, we're going to add up all the things you've done in your life good and all things that are bad. And if you've done more good than bad, then you get to progress into another being, into a next life, basically, that will help get you closer to going to heaven. Based that in essence, if your life is more negative than good, then you're going to go backwards down the list. So if you were bad, you maybe become an insect again. Then if you're good as an insect, then you can learn to become an animal again. And then if you learn being an animal, then you can become a human again, and so forth. So Hinduism believes in reincarnation. Hinduism tends to be a polytheistic religion as well. They have lots of different gods for different things. And some of them actually, they have like 3 or 4 gods that different names, different personalities, but kind of essentially they all do the same thing to an extent. So sometimes they try to unify some of these diverse branches of Hinduism to bring it back in. Their goal is to meditate and get yourself to attain this state of being that allows you to achieve the highest level of understanding. And then when you achieve that, when you die, you break out of this cycle of rebirth, basically called samsara. So the goal is to get out of that cycle, get yourself to the point where you can attain the highest level of spirituality, and then you can break free of it, and then you get to go to heaven. Until then, you're stuck in the cycle, either going up this ladder or down the ladder. And that's, all your past lives add up and so forth. So that's basically in a nutshell what Hinduism is. And so Buddhism follows something similar, but says there really isn't per se a heaven. There's more of just the energy. And when you reach this state of enlightenment, this nirvana, you've become one with the energy around you to a point where when you die, you just become energy, kind of an idea. That gets changed later with Mahayana Buddhism as it kind of branches off, and they say, well, we believe Buddha is actually God and we can become a God. So there's kind of like this stage like heaven that you can go to as you're making that journey to the ultimate energy place. Now, if any of you are Star Wars fans and my description of Buddhism sounds a little like Star Wars, it is. That is because George Lucas and the others, I remembered the name now. George Lucas and the others were Buddhists. They believed in Buddhism, and so they followed. Buddhism is actually a foundational philosophy for the whole concept of the Jedi, basically. If you understand Buddhism and then watch the Star Wars shows, you're like, oh, I see it. Oh, okay, yeah, monastic life, living, no attachments, all that stuff. Almost an ascetic lifestyle like Jainism. So yeah, there's some cool similarities there. So that's Hinduism, and then Buddhism comes off of that as well. Then you have in China, you have 2 philosophies that originate more from the cultures of China. One is Taoism. So Taoism is the idea that there is this energy that exists around us, and we need to be in flow with the Tao, and we need to allow natural things happen. So our job as humans is to get out of the way and not try to impose on the natural order of things our opinions and ideas. Taoism kind of gets rid of the idea of learning by book. You can't learn by book. You need to learn by doing and exploring and understanding. And so Taoism tends to focus on let's watch nature and watch how nature does things, and then we can use our observations of nature to teach us and help us understand the natural patterns and how can we do things. So Taoism didn't thrive too well just because, to be a good Taoist, in a way, you kind of have to go off away from everybody else and focus on yourself, coming closer to that energy and getting involved in that. So it's not a religion that necessarily encourages a church organization, if you will. The philosophies are still around. If you've ever seen the Tao Te Ching book, is there. The I Ching, the different symbols, those are the all they mean things for Taoism and the flow of energy and what does that mean. So people are familiar, conceptually have experienced some Taoism. If you ever see the Korean flag, they have those, it looks like a bunch of bars in different combinations around the middle part of the flag. That's the philosophies of Taoism. Basically, those go back to the I Ching and those concepts, which is kind of cool. Taoism is very passive. Taoism is, like I says, it's let's get out of the way and just kind of let things happen. Confucianism came from a gentleman named Confucius. That he was or he got that label at least. He very ancient in this comes back to like the 100 wars period in so we're talking close to 700 BC time frame. He comes up and he realizes, society sucks. The government's corrupt. Our laws are corrupt. Things are corrupt. This world is terrible. We need to change this. We need to learn to live better, be better people ourselves. So his philosophy is more about how can I be better? How can I live a better life? So it really fits in. Sometimes people say it fits with the golden rule, even though it kind of doesn't. They have what we'd call a silver rule, because it's be nice to others, but if somebody treats you bad, then give them justice. So not all the way as clear as the golden rule, but it's all about how can I live in harmony with others and nature, of course, but live in harmony in society. If a government were focused more on how can we bless the lives of the people, how can we enrich the members of our society versus how can I make more money as a politician, then life would be better. So the Confucianism is about how to be a better person in society for yourself and for others. How can we develop and enhance our relationships with our family? The concept of what's called filial piety is a common thing in Confucianism. That's honoring your elders. So honoring your father and mother is important for a son. Honoring your siblings, honoring your emperor, the leaders above you, is important. That's almost supersedes anything else. In fact, we were given an example in my Chinese class, because Confucianism comes from China, of a story of a guy that if you believed in more legalism and other things like that, if you knew your dad committed a crime, you'd turn him in because you want to fulfill justice. Whereas with Confucianism, you would say, no, my honor and respect to my dad would mean I'm basically going to lie for him and cover him and not turn him in. So it's just interesting how these are different perspectives of how can we live truth in our life, basically, when you try to compare them with like Christianity or other groups. There's threads that run through them, and I think those threads that run through them are where you can see more truth. But it's a really fascinating philosophy. I would not discourage you from learning it more and understanding it more. It's good to learn. It's fun to learn how do other people believe. So those are some of the Asian groups that we talked about. So I'm going to be spending this weekend and next week studying more about the Abrahamic religion. So I'll do an update next week for those. But a lot of fun, a lot of cool stuff to learn, and I'm looking forward to continuing to learn more. So again, if you have questions about what we talked about, or thoughts or ideas of what we've learned, or insights or ahas you get, as I've tried to really, really quickly summarize Hinduism and Buddhism and Taoism and Confucianism, hopefully it helps you out and to kind of spark your interest and get you learning. But what observations or ahas you have, I look to commenting with you in the comment section about those. And we'll see you next week at our next update.